you tell everything?
Everything, as an historian should.
A classic British series told the story of 4 Roman emperors, told from the perspective of a member of the imperial family who was often shunned because people thought he was a fool and a half-wit. Oh, that just takes me back to my 11th birthday party. But on the plus side, I didn't have to share the cake.
Life's full of irony, isn't it?
Anyway, sometimes even the biggest fools can become emperor. So there's hope for me yet. I, Claudius.
Be no pain, I promise.
Anno Domini millesimo, nontegisimo septuagesimo sexto. BBC duas fabulas Roberti Graves in drama historicum insignum BBC 2. I Claudius abdatavit.
Off your tree?
Of course.
Series duodecim partem ampla est, quae insidias palatinas primorum quater imperiotum Romanorum, Augustae
Gordon's alive!
Tiberii Caligulae
You've noticed too?
et Claudiae, qui charte constigitur documentat.
So sometimes I think that I'm going mad.
I Claudius via limites eorum que in serie dramatica BBC ostende possunt propagavit.
Stop it.
What's that?
The script is in Latin, bruv.
What do you mean the script is in Latin? Are you sure? This looks like the same old shit you get me to read every other time.
It's in blatant Latin.
Oh, sorry everyone. It appears due to an erroneous setting, we've started the video in Latin. So apologies. We're just going to have a do-over. Just forget that we did this.
Now you may leave me, I have a headache.
In 1976, the BBC took 2 Robert Graves novels and adapted them into the landmark BBC 2 costume drama I, Claudius, a sprawling 12-part series documenting palace intrigues of the first 4 Roman emperors, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius.
The kitchen details, even the gossip.
Why? Why should you want to write such a book, eh?
As far as historical accuracy goes, I, Claudius sticks quite closely to established history, but it's a dramatization that does take some artistic license. Put it this way, you wouldn't necessarily fail your history test by taking I, Claudius at face value, just so long as you remember that the 3rd Julio-Claudian emperor was not John Hurt.
How do you know?
I know.
It's a history lesson, a scandalous soap, a family drama, a comedy, and a thriller, all in a cosy BBC television centre wrapper. It's got all manner of debauchery implied and sometimes shown, some incredibly tough scenes involving suicide, infanticide, regicide, parricide, and fratricide, all the sides. I, Claudius really pushed the envelope of what could be shown in a BBC drama series.
Well, make sure she's not a virgin before you kill her. Now get on with it!
The violence here is mostly implied, though no less horrific, and there's more overt incest in the series than the next nearest offender, the Brady Bunch.
That incest would be technical only.
The BBC in the 60s and 70s had a well-earned reputation for producing elegant costume drama. That is, period set programs about people in palaces and stately homes, rather than 2 seamstresses arguing over who's going to fix a busted zipper.
He had my father executed soon after I was born.
I'm sorry.
Yes, so was my father.
Back in the day, the Beeb had mounted lavish dramas about every king and queen, adapted every classic novel, and turned every war into a 13-part series filled with fine actors. And once they'd done them all, they'd start again and do them all again. There was all manner of Wuthering Pride, Nicholas Copperfields, and 6 Henrys of Elizabeth R. In the mid-70s, they'd do the Romans, just for a change of scenery. Of course, the obvious joke is to call this I Clav Divs. But it's such an obvious joke that I'll just make it once, so here we go. I Clav Divs. See, we're done. I'm not going to beat a joke to death. But if I did, there would clearly have to be some sort of bullshit restocking fee.
He's an embarrassment to everyone, even his mother can't stand him.
The other obvious joke, invent time travel to bring Claudius back to the 20th century, so he can sue Robert Graves for using his life story without permission. And then once that's settled, the pair of them could travel to the 21st century and sue Apple for trademark infringement.
We're ready now.
I, Claudius began midway through the reign of the first emperor of Rome, Augustus Caesar. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar and in general was a relatively benevolent ruler. However, his wife Livia is obsessed with pushing her own choice of successor to Augustus over his anointed heirs. Livia's son Tiberius isn't interested in becoming emperor, but Livia ain't having none of that. For her, the double negatives and poor grammar are worth it, since anyone other than Tiberius becoming emperor would be disastrous. The problem is, Augustus doesn't rate Tiberius at all and sets him lots of busy work, invade here, administer that, divorce this woman and marry that one. In the meantime, Livia sets to work getting rid of anybody that Augustus ever praises in case he makes them his heir.
I told you he was popular!
She will use whatever means she has at hand, whispering campaigns, discrediting rivals, arranging accidents. But if she had to pick a poison, it would be actual poison. Poisoning somebody in ancient Rome was a relatively easy crime to get away with. No forensics experts, limited understanding of how the human body worked, and people would often just assume that a corpse with blue skin, a purple tongue and a swollen neck was because that they hadn't sacrificed the right type of goat to the appropriate god. I mean, you couldn't just pick any goat from the goat warehouse, but you could ask their team of experts which is the right goat for the god.
And what other poisons do you use? Have you ever tried aconite?
Livia is also incredibly subtle about how she goes about thinning out the short list of future emperors, so much so that Augustus is quite blind to her machinations, but as will become a pattern, his paranoia will increase the longer he reigns.
That is a fine product of a proper Roman Union. But can't you stop that twitching?
While the title character doesn't appear much in early episodes, most of the series is told in flashback from the perspective of an elderly Claudius, a member of the imperial family. His full name was Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, but thankfully he never worked for a company that insisted your work email was your full name. That's probably for the best, as Claudius stammered, had facial tics and limped. All through his life he was treated as a fool and shunned by most of his family. But Claudius wasn't an idiot. He was a scholar and historian who wanted Rome to return to a republic. But because of his conditions, he was thought of as a harmless idiot. At times his friend Herod would advise Claudius to continue to play the fool, since that way no one would ever see him as any sort of threat. Being identified as a rival to the wrong person could mark you for death in ancient Rome, whereas in modern Rome, asking for ketchup for your pasta will end up with the same result. Whew, it's a good thing I didn't ask for decaf. Claudius soon works out that his best chance of survival is to not rock the boat, to play the clueless fool, and to just agree with everyone, regardless of how stupid or evil they are. Claudius would become the ultimate survivor.
This is the most glorious hour of my life.
Claudius was the grandson of Mark Antony on one side and Livia on the other, with Augustus his step-grandfather. Claudius had two siblings. His brother Germanicus was an early casualty of the dynastic predisposition towards death in less than usual circumstances, which of course knocked him out of the running to become emperor. Their sister Livilla would be a player in Roman affairs, as well as having many of them. She'd also be party to Livia's schemes.
I'm supposed to rule an empire, and I can't even rule my own family.
Augustus is not a murder-happy emperor, preferring instead to banish people to live on a small remote island. He thinks most of the intrigue in Rome is down to minor family squabbles. But of course, family squabbles where somebody is banished to live on a small remote island. The thing is, there's actually a long wait list for banishment, and Rome is in danger of running out of enough small remote islands.
Marcus Volusius Saturnus, have you slept with my daughter?
Augustus will live to a ripe old age, but to avoid anybody poisoning him, Augustus will insist on only eating fruit that he has picked himself. Now, on papyrus, that's a good strategy, but Livia puts the poison on the figs while they're still on the tree.
Augustus is dead.
Tiberius is already at an advanced age when he takes over from Augustus, and along the way he finds his ideal hobby is to be a right perv. I mean, he's into anything and everything. He would be the best customer for both Uber Eats and OnlyFans. Tiberius always talked about wrestling with his darker side, though orgies aren't necessarily the best place to find some quality me time. His debauchery isn't explicitly shown, but towards the end of his reign, his kinky proclivities will be talked about to the point where a mother offers herself to him so he won't sleep with her daughter, leading to the mother taking her own life at a party. Now, it could have been worse. She could have got the guests to buy Tupperware first. Tiberius would also attempt to take out his rivals, though in comparison to his mother, he was not half as successful. Yet, with all of this, Tiberius would still not be the worst emperor.
What are you grinning at, monster? You are a monster, aren't you?
Claudius, despite being renowned for his desire to return to a Roman republic and his writing of honest histories, is just considered the family idiot, the guy who always, and I mean always, trips and falls into the cake at wedding receptions. His grandmother has so little fear of Claudius that an aged Livia does a deal with him. She wants to make sure that Tiberius' successor makes her a goddess, since a goddess won't have to spend eternity dealing with the consequences of her actions in life. In return, she'll outline to her stammering grandson all of her transgressions, namely her part in the deaths of Marcellus, Marcus Agrippa, his son Drusus, Lucius, Posthumus, and even Augustus. Not all were poisoned, and some were killed by others before she got the chance.
But I'd marked them both down for death.
But I wonder if she had collected all of the points on her Poison Club loyalty card. You get a free vial of hemlock with every fourth somewhat suspicious death.
Do you seriously think if I wanted to dispose of you, I'd stoop to doing it myself?
Claudius's brother, Germanicus, was killed by yet another poisoner, but Germanicus's wife Agrippina would be a thorn in the side of Tiberius, but a different type of thorn to the one he preferred, the kinky sod. As ruler, Tiberius had put all of his trust in the soldier Sejanus, who would basically carve out his own empire in Tiberius's name. His full name is Lucius Aelius Sejanus, but down at the steam baths, he's known as Harry Sejanus. Claudius's sister Livilla and Sejanus are lovers, but his attempts to marry her were put on ice by Tiberius, who instead suggested that Sejanus marry Livilla's very young daughter. I bet Livilla didn't see that one coming. Sejanus was sleeping with Livilla, but engaged to her daughter, while Tiberius's nephew Claudius was Sejanus's brother-in-law after marrying Sejanus's sister. Livilla had poisoned her husband and cousin, Castor, son of Tiberius, who was of course Livilla's uncle. When Tiberius discovers that his niece and daughter-in-law, who were one and the same, were involved with the death of his son and her cousin, who again were one and the same, he finally removed Sejanus. Claudius has to watch as his mother, Antonia, locks Livilla in her room and waits outside until her own daughter starves to death. Tiberius himself was near death when Claudius's nephew Caligula had his lackey Macro finish the job, where, if you thought things couldn't be worse than Tiberius, incoming Emperor Caligula asks you to hold his wine. In previous episodes, we'd seen a young Caligula clearly having issues with boundaries, self-control and good taste, playing inappropriate games with his sister and setting Claudius's house on fire. As emperor, he soon establishes that he was less sane than a maritime insurance broker thinking he was going to get a huge bonus for underwriting this new unsinkable ocean liner called the Titanic. Caligula very quickly would make everyone around him live in fear of his clear insanity and his temper, where people were killed at the drop of a hat.
But I shall kill you just the same.
And this is a metaphorical hat, of course, but it's made from 2 tons of lead. His supposed backup emperor Gemellus had a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. Well, it went away. And yet, while the results are often the same, that's still not the dumbest treatment for a cold or flu that I've seen. He organised a brothel where senators' wives were to work as prostitutes. Claudius, of course, had to work the door. Later, Caligula made Claudius dump his hooker girlfriend Calpurnia to marry the young Messalina.
I'm not supposed to have made you happy, nor you her. It's meant to be a joke.
Caligula suffered from extreme headaches, but terrorised everybody around him. He not only thought he was a god, but the goddest god of all. But he liked the classics, so he referred to himself as Zeus or Jove rather than Jupiter. A god complex normally gets you a rubber man cave, rather than emperorship of Rome. But Caligula is a lesson in what happens when you give a psychotic man-child unlimited power.
You know everybody, don't you? His life has really opened up since I made him a senator.
Everyone around him spends all of their time on tiptoes, agreeing with every mad utterance while trying to appease the unappeasable. That is until he declares peas a heresy, and before you know it, he's declared war on legumes.
My sister and I are pleased to admit you into our presence once again.
Caligula would marry his sister Drusilla, impregnate her, and then would try to eat the baby.
Don't go in there.
Top that Coronation Street. Caligula only lasted a few years as emperor before people finally had enough Caligulating, and he was murdered. The assassins had intended on killing all of the imperial family so that Rome could return to being a republic. However, the Praetorian Guard realized they'd be out of work if there was no emperor, and so they installed Claudius.
That's our new emperor.
Claudius did not want to be emperor, but he was smart enough to realize that the only way a republic could work was if every single member of the imperial family was killed. Last he checked, his family was full of Drususes, Gaiuses, Germanicuses, Livias, Livillas, Agrippas, Agrippinas, and so reluctantly he accepts the job. Claudius turns out to be a relatively sane, present, and wise ruler, though it turns out that his young wife Messalina is having a bit on the side. Now, a bit on the side is an understatement when Messalina wins a sex contest against the empire's greatest prostitute.
Your friend size must be made out of old army boots.
Anyway, Claudius was a relatively benign ruler and came into his own as emperor, stammering far less, his tics had mostly gone, and his limp was less pronounced. But his weakness was that he was easily manipulated by people who not just flattered him, but treated him the same as people who didn't stammer. Messalina's trophy for whoring may have gone straight to the pool room, but that doesn't play well with the emperor. Her attempts to usurp Claudius by marrying someone else doesn't end well for her or the curtains. I mean, blood is hell to shift.
Well, you can't survive long.
No, not even you.
The final episode is set after Claudius's death, where his widow and her son are looking for his will, and instead they read his journals which outline why he married his niece Agrippinella, who wanted her son Nero named as Claudius' successor and would poison him.
An uncle does not marry his niece. The union will be incestuous and the gods abominate incest.
Old Claudius now realises he'd been too good a ruler. He'd seen an old prophecy where much of it had come true, so he believes that if he allowed himself to be killed so Nero could take over, that Nero would be a terrible ruler. Claudius believed that the only way to return to a republic was to have a truly awful emperor, so that people might clamour for an end to the monarchy. Claudius felt he was near death anyway, so he takes one for the team, yet it's all for naught.
Agrippinilla will kill him. Then Nero will kill her.
Oh, it sounds depressingly familiar.
Nero would turn out to be a pretty bad emperor, but the emperors of Rome would stick around for a couple of hundred years. None of that's in I Claudius, this is just a bit of context, like how my own pronounced limp is due to me constantly kicking my little toe into the edge of the shower.
You will surely die for this attempt on my life!
Funnily enough, that's exactly what I said to the shower. Even without a desk calendar, Claudius knows that his days are numbered and zones out while addressing the Senate one last time. He just doesn't care, seeing all of his relatives and friends one more time as he dies.
Wasn't worth it, was it? I could have told you that.
In technical terms, I Claudius is a wallop to the face. If you're just used to BBC historical dramas where English kings and queens have stern faces as they stare down their rivals.
He believes she will stop at nothing to ensure that Tiberius follows Augustus. He believes she's mad.
Prolific author Robert Graves wrote his satirical, semi-fictional sort of historical account of the early emperors of Rome in I Claudius and the follow-up Claudius the God, both published in 1934.
I also began this most strange history of my life.
The books were both critical and financial hits, the latter helping Graves quickly get out of a financial hole.
Caligula burned the house down. And then all she said was, if you haven't got a bucket, piss on it.
In 1937, Alexander Korda announced he was going to produce a feature film version of I Claudius. He cast brilliant but difficult actor Charles Lawton as Claudius and Merle Oberon as Messalina. Filming had started but was abandoned after Oberon was in a car crash. With that, I Claudius was just something you read, with people thinking any attempt to mount a live-action version would be doomed to failure after it would be hit with the same curse that caused Korda's film to fail.
You have made a study of it.
There had been a 1972 theatrical production starring David Warner, but the next step was television.
And don't think you can get round it by getting engaged to 9-year-old girls. I know that dodge.
Nearly 40 years after the feature film version fell apart like a suspension bridge made out of Rocky Road ice cream, the BBC took a punt that curses either don't exist, have a statute of limitations, or can be negated with the right goat sacrifice. Or in this case, a good script. Martin Leesmore had made a name for himself producing popular adaptations of classic novels and would produce I Claudius with frequent collaborator Betty Willingale script editing.
Did it never strike you as odd that it happened when Livia's personal physician was looking after him?
Jack Pullman also had a reputation as somebody who could do wonders with adapting classic novels, and he'd adapt both I Claudius and Claudius the God with Herbert Wise directing. Production was delayed slightly as the rights to the story were still controlled, at least partially, by the company involved with the 1937 film. That company would also have some involvement in the casting process.
Or as quick as boiled asparagus, I'll have you out. Out!
I Claudius was made in the standard BBC way at the time. Each 50-minute episode was to be made in a 2-week period, or 10 working days. Extensive rehearsals were followed by a couple of days in the multi-camera studio. I Claudius featured no location work at all, with only the title sequences shot on film. Everything was mounted on a set in the studio, whether it was interiors or exteriors, and those sets are magnificent. They're large in scope, and you rarely felt claustrophobic.
I've seen my splendid son Germanicus murdered, and my grandsons Drusus, Nero, Gemellus. My granddaughter's a degenerate beyond redemption, and your sister Livilla died by my own hand.
I Claudius was a prestige production, but such was the way the BBC television was made at the time, it was given a similar amount of studio time as any other 50-minute drama. Without exotic locations, or car chases, or space monsters, I Claudius' story of Roman power struggles would rely on the cast to bring Pullman scripts to life. The cast was made up of some of the finest theatre actors around at the time, as well as a few who'd been known for television.
But I marked the zodiac on the floor of the hen house, and a chicken came down and rested on your birth sign.
Brian Blessed was Augustus. He was directed by Wise to keep a lid on his performance until a crucial scene where he interrogates all of the senators who'd slept with his daughter.
Is there anyone in Rome who has not slept with my daughter?
Sian Phillips as Livia took some time to work out how to play such an evil character without her villainy seeming cartoonish. In the end, she often played her as somebody with immense patience playing a very, very long game.
Do you imagine that I would stoop to buying you off when I could swat you like a fly?
George Baker was 42 at the time, but had to play Tiberius from his 20s to his late 70s.
I will not discuss such matters in the street. Good day, Mother. Move on.
John Hurt had initially turned down Caligula, but took the role after attending a party and realising just how many great actors he would be working with.
Oh, by Jove! Which is always to say by myself.
The initial idea was for different actors to play Claudius at different stages. Several actors were considered and some were approached, but in the end, Derek Jacobi was cast fairly late in the day and would be playing Claudius from a young man all the way to old age. The rest of the cast is littered with good to great actors, ones you might recognise from something else. On the whole, with a few exceptions, Claudius didn't necessarily raid the National Theatre or RSC for its Lady Macbeths and Hamlets, but did cast a lot of the people who would play all the other roles in those prestigious productions. Almost anybody you would see on television at the time and you thought to yourself, my, they're quite good, is in Claudius somewhere.
You're a fool, Claudius, and Germanicus would have had no patience with you.
Probably.
I'm not going to name everybody, but there's Margaret Tyzack, John Rhys-Davies, Bernard Hepton, Fiona Walker, James Faulkner, Simon MacCorkindale, Ian Ogilvy, Patricia Quinn, Bernard Hill, Sheila Ruskin, Peter Bowles, Sheila White, Barbara Young, and just lots of really, really, really good actors. But of course, there's one actor that the Star Trek fans started typing furiously about 10 minutes ago, because I hadn't mentioned him until this point. Patrick Stewart as Sir Janus, wearing some pretty natty BBC-issued hair.
I told you I didn't wish to discuss that again.
If there's a duff performance in Claudius, then I must have dozed off, because the acting is in general quite marvellous.
And what makes you think that a filthy, smelly old woman like you could become a goddess?
Derek Jacobi is outstanding, and while he'd go on to do lots of work, he would be forever linked with his role as Claudius, to the point where some people were surprised that he didn't stammer in real life. Sian Phillips was pitch perfect as Livia, where she can make being bored seem so energetic, where a mass murderer's logic sort of made sense. And John Hurt was simply amazing. It takes a lot to play a mentally unstable character without playing them like they're an inmate of an asylum. Brian Blessed and George Baker were also excellent additions to the cast. In fact, I don't really have much to criticise about Claudius. The sets and costumes are outstanding, as is the direction, the lighting and the camera work.
Is there a decent life for a Roman?
The thing about Claudius is that it does feel very authentic. It feels like you are watching people in ancient Rome, or would do if you could get over the sight of Patrick Stewart in a wig without saying, make it so. Historical consultant Robert Erskine advised the cast and crew in how to get the details of Roman life correct, even reminding the actors of Roman traditions, namely, eat with your right hand, since it was not best discussed where your left hand had been.
You never said anything to me.
If I had to pick a weak spot of Claudius, it would be the old age makeup, which probably worked at the time, but now looks to be the most dated aspect of the story.
Said it was a shame, didn't I?
I mean, that's just to pick more nits than a champion nitpicker who was the winner of last year's Montreux Prix de Pinillage.
That's a very childish thing to say.
This would have been even more perfect if it had been shot on film, but for a multi-camera video production, it's great. With film, it could have been even better, even more better than perfect. It could have been uber perfect.
You know I think so.
For such a fantastic show, things didn't always go well for the people involved with the production. Producer Martin Leesmore was killed shortly after the series was broadcast, with writer Jack Pullman also passing away not long after. For some, the curse of Claudius was a real thing.
Doesn't anybody in this city ever say anything that isn't either vicious or treasonable?
Claudius was shown in Britain as 12 episodes, with the first episode being a double-length instalment. American audiences would eventually see those first 2 episodes split into 2, which would make, now don't help me, 13 episodes. So yes, 13 episodes when it was shown on PBS as part of Masterpiece Theatre. Or as they call it in Britain, theatre.
Don't sulk.
When Claudius was screened on BBC Two in late 1976, initial reviews from newspaper critics weren't amazing, but over time they'd come to heap praise on the show.
They were both infected with that infantile disorder known as republicanism.
As a BBC Two series, Claudius wasn't expected to pull in huge numbers, but it was a popular enough show at the time. While the BBC got higher ratings screening shows like Starsky and Hutch and Kojak, Claudius would become one of the most remembered BBC dramas of the 1970s.
Not for a god, it was very simple.
There'd also be a 90s radio adaptation, but it's still that BBC Two drama that's just stuck in people's minds. Well, rather like the swords stuck into Caligula's chest.
No, you can't have a god, you can't kill the
The series would win several BAFTA awards for Jacobi and Phillips and production designer Tim Harvey, who would also go on to win an Emmy. I have to think a production designer will have the absolutely best laid out trophy cabinet anywhere. Other movies and series put on ancient Rome with larger budgets: Caligula, or the BBC co-production with HBO, Rome.
Well, I dare say they could tell a pretty tale.
A pretty tale isn't proof.
A genre best described as tits and Tituses, with finances that would make I, Claudius's budget seem barely enough to cover the Merkin budget of Rome.
So put on a good show, and there'll be plenty of money for the living and a decent burial for the dead.
I first saw I, Claudius a decade later, when it was repeated where I lived. Although it was a little dry for me as a teenager, I watched the whole thing as I was in my whole BBC drama kick at the time.
I'm sure the fat one's going to win.
This was slightly above my level at that age.
Or perhaps he just didn't understand it.
But still highly enjoyable. It's definitely something that gets better with age, whether it's you watching it when you're older, or of course the show itself.
Thrasyllus has prophesied that he will avenge your death, so you cannot harm him.
I, Claudius is a little scandalous, a little out there, a satire on ambition and the lust for power, and what happens when you give ultimate power to people who are corrupted by it. Watch I, Claudius for the backbiting, or the backstabbing, or even the front stabbing. Just watch it.
Couldn't get into it. Very well written, of course. Oh, very well written.
Sic haec recensio tibi relicet queso like et subscribe. Commentarium infra relinque fel unum es alas nostros video specta. Nulle restitutiontia fiunt sin pretio respondite inepte.
I wasn't the Messiah after all. Do you believe it? Could have knocked me over with a feather when they told me.